Well, Chris, I was going to make a joke about you taking more than 1 minute, but you talked me up, so I'll make that joke later. If you want to go ahead and open up to Matthew 21, verse 33. Go ahead and open up to Matthew 21, verse 33. We're going to be there for the majority of the night. So here's what I want to do this time. Our whole theme this quarter with these parables is talking all about how does it help us in following Christ. So as we go through this parable tonight, what I want you to be thinking about, go ahead and jot down this question if you're taking notes, or if you're not taking notes, or if you have any sort of implant in your brain that allows you to do that, go ahead and make that mental note. Go ahead and jot down whatever this question. How does this parable help me follow Christ? And what I'm going to do at the end of the lesson, that's going to be the question that I pose to you. And we can have that final discussion. But I wanted to go ahead and have you thinking about it now. So as we're going through, we can have those ideas. And then at the end of the lesson, we have that final discussion as to how this parable helps us follow Christ. So Matthew 21, verse 33 and 45. We are going to read here real quick the parable of the wicked vine dressers. Here another parable. There was a certain landowner who planted a vineyard and set a hedge around it, dug a winepress in it, and built a tower. And he leased it to vine dressers and went into a far country. Now when the vintage time drew near, he sent his servants to the vine dressers, that they might receive its fruit. And the vine dressers took his servants, beat one, killed one, and stoned another. Again he sent other servants, more like the first one, and they did likewise to them. Then last of all he sent his son to them, saying, They will respect my son. But when the vine dressers saw the son, they said among themselves, This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and seize his inheritance. So they took him and cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. Therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vine dressers? They said to him, He will destroy those wicked men miserably and lease his vineyard to another vine dresser, who will render to him the fruits of their seasons. Jesus said to them, Have you never read the scriptures? The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. This was the Lord's doing, and it was marvelous in our eyes. Therefore, I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken from you and given to a nation bearing of its fruits. And whoever falls on this stone will be broken, but on whomever it falls will be ground into powder. Now, when the chief priests and the Pharisees heard his parables, they perceived that he was speaking to them. But when they sought to lay hands on him, they feared the multitude, because they took him for a prophet. So here in this parable, we see the idea of a vine dresser building a vineyard and leasing it to other people. So let's take a look a little bit at the background of what's going on here before we really jump into the purpose and the meaning and the application to us. Let's take it back a little bit and look to see where we're coming from and what we've got here. The idea of a parable dealing with vineyards and dealing with laborers is not new to Jesus's audiences. We see in a couple of other different places in the New Testament where he's given a similar parable. In Matthew 20, verse 1, it deals with hiring these different laborers to work in a vineyard. Very similar to this one. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. And then throughout the rest of that parable, we see where some of them worked in the morning, some of them worked in the afternoon, some of them worked at night, and they all received the reward in the end. In Matthew 21, verse 28, just previous to this one, it deals with a father and his two sons. He tells one of his sons, Hey, I want you to go work in the vineyard. Yes, Father, I'll go do that. And then he never does it. Then he tells the other son, I want you to go work in the vineyard. And the son says, No, I won't do it. Then he goes and does it. I'm not a father, but I do have a lot of students, and I tell them many things to go and do their work. So I understand where the father is coming from here when he has one son that refuses to do it and then does it, and vice versa. So an interesting deal there with talking about vineyards. In Luke 13, verse 6, it deals with an unproductive fig tree, kind of following our same theme of the parable that we're going to look at tonight. Now, all of these different parables, even the ones that Christ spoke here in the New Testament, speaking to his different audiences, is not going to be new to them. If they were well versed in the scriptures, they would have known that all of these different vineyard parables goes back to Isaiah 5 and verse 1. So let's flip over there real quick and look at Isaiah 5:1. Now, he's speaking here to the elders and the chief priests. So most likely they were highly familiar with scriptures, and they knew that he was making this callback to Isaiah 5:1. Now let me sing the song to my well-beloved, a song of my beloved regarding his vineyard. My well-beloved has a vineyard on a very fruitful hill. He dug it up and cleared out its stones and planted it with the choicest vine. He built a tower in its midst and also made a winepress in it. So he expected it to bring forth good grapes, but it brought forth wild grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and men of Judah, judge please between me and my vineyard. What more could have been done to my vineyard that I have not done to it? Why then, when I expected it to bring forth good grapes, did it bring forth wild grapes? And now please let me tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take it away from its hedge, and it shall be burned, and break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will lay waste, and it shall not be pruned or dug. But there shall come up from briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no more on it. So this here, talking about in Isaiah, is talking about the unfruitful works of Judah, of Israel, of the Jews themselves, talking about what is going to happen to them as a people for not following the ways of the Lord. So Christ here in Matthew is using that same idea of what's going on in this vineyard and relating it to these elders and chief priests to whom he is speaking. So we know what's going on here with this parable here in Matthew. We kind of have some background information as to they've probably heard something along these same lines before. They're probably familiar with this idea of a vineyard, not just the fact that they might have worked in a vineyard at some point, not just because the fact that they understand the worldly aspect of this parable, but they understand at some point prior to this, Christ and Isaiah both gave parables similar to this. So who is he speaking to, and why does that matter to us tonight? Why does that matter in this particular parable? Let's look at some of the events leading up to him giving this parable. Look in Matthew 21 and verse 12. Just look a little bit further up, 21:12. The day prior to giving this parable was the day that Christ drove all of the different people out of the temple. Then Jesus went into the temple of God and drove out all those who bought and sold in the temple and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he said to them, "It is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves." So this is the day right before he gives this parable. But who is he talking to? A little while after that, in Matthew 21:14, then the blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he healed them. But when the chief priests and scribes saw the wonderful things that he did, and the children crying out in the temple and saying, "Hosanna to the Son of David," they were indignant and said to him, "Do you hear what these are saying?" So he's there in Jerusalem at the temple dealing with the high priests and the scribes. And he's already done two things at this point that is just causing these chief priests and scribes to start gnashing their teeth and start wondering, what can we do about this guy? They are becoming indignant. That means inflamed. That means that they were greatly angered at this point. So they are going to try to trap him with a question. And Jesus said to them, "Yes, have you never read, out of the mouth of babes and nursing infants, you have perfected praise." Then he answered them and went out of the city to Bethany, and he lodged there. Now after that, deals with the fig tree that was withered and eventually becomes cursed and develops no more figs. And then after that, a little while later, those same chief priests that he was dealing with the day before come to him, and they've got their question ready that they are going to try to use to trap him, to try to get him to speak blasphemy or something like that. And they ask him. Now, when he came into the temple, the chief priests and the elders of the people confronted him as he was teaching and said, "By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you that authority?" They're not trying here to gain an understanding. They're not trying to learn from his teachings. They're trying to trap him. Now, Christ knows this, and so he's going to tell them a couple of different parables. And he knows by this point that these chief priests and these elders are so indignant by the things that he has done. And so he's going to, in turn, trap them and get them to understand that they are at fault here with the use of two parables. So we're not going to focus on the parable of the two sons there. We are going to focus there instead on the parable of the wicked vine dressers. He never directly answers their question, but then he poses a question to them after that. So, why does it matter that he is speaking to these people here? To the chief priests, to the elders. Anyone want to take a stab at it? Do what? Okay. So they're the people's leaders here. They have some sense of authority. They have some sense of the words that they speak are listened to by large amounts of the population. They have different ways that they could interject within the community and not control them. Can't think of the right word right now. Influence. Yeah, influence. To influence them. So yeah, good point there. So why else does it really matter that he's giving this specific parable to the chiefs and the elders?
Well, they're getting ready to kill him. They've already made their decision to do that. I mean, you're not far away from really his, kind of whole triumphal entry, and they're going to kill him. And so, he's really giving them a nod to let them know that you're no different than all the prophets that he killed before because you didn't want to listen to them. You may think that you're so much better religiously because you got all this God stuff, whatever you want to call it, figured out, but you're no different. You just come full circle with it is all you do.
Yes. So this parable here to these listeners has two purposes. Number one is to tell them, hey, listen, all of these prophets that have come beforehand, you have rejected them. We have so many instances of the different prophets having to flee for their lives for whatever reason. We have John the Baptist himself who was beheaded. We see exactly what happened to all of those different prophets who were the mouthpieces of God. And that reflects clearly whenever we have those different messengers that the vine dresser sent to check on his vineyard. So the second purpose there, to these specific listeners, Christ knows that he is about to be crucified, that he is about to be killed. This is one of the many different times that he plainly speaks it to the masses that they are going to kill him. He predicts his crucifixion right here in this parable where he says the vine dresser sent his son, they took him and they killed him and they threw him out. So two things to the listeners. Number one, they had rejected the prophets. And number two, predicts his eventual crucifixion. Okay? So let's break down the meaning of all the different parts. We've got a lot of different moving parts in this parable. First off, we have the vine dresser, the person who bought the vineyard, he built the tower, he built the fence, and then he leased it out to everyone else. That is who? That one's God, okay? Harkens right back there to Isaiah 5:1, talking about him being the vine dresser and the vineyard itself being Israel. And then the people of Israel are the people who it was leased to. The messengers that are being sent were all of the different prophets that were being sent throughout the course of the Old Testament to speak to the people, to prepare the way. Okay? All of them, many of them, not all of them, many of them were persecuted by the very people that they were sent to. Then you've got the Son, who's the Son? The Son is the Son. Son is Christ. I think that one's a pretty clear correlation there. And then we get there, and the people who are leasing the land take him, kill him, throw him out. So we know the purpose to the listeners at that time. So what do you think would be one of the purposes to us? It's all. There we go.
That we don't repeat what they did, because we could still crucify Jesus one more time about the things.
Yeah. One of my favorite songs that we sing, Can He Still Feel the Nails? Every time I fail, can he hear the crowds cry, crucify him? And now the words don't come to me all of a sudden whenever I'm on the spot. That's one of my favorite songs because, it creates that stabbing for us where we're thinking, are the things that I do continue to do the things that they did to him? I mean, we've all heard the lesson where someone goes into extreme detail about that week of the crucifixion and all the different things that he did there. So it's kind of that idea of, am I causing those same things? So number one, you actually got my first note here. Number one, this parable comes to us as a warning. Don't reject Christ. Do not add to the crucifixion. Matthew, was that a hand up? What? Okay. Matthew 21:41. Right here. And honestly, I really think that the chief priests and the elders here answer this question for me. I really got an easy parable here because, number one, the chief priests trapped themselves. They answered this question for us. And then number two, Christ goes ahead and lays it all out as well. So look in 21:41. They said to him, he will destroy those wicked men miserably and lease his vineyard to another vine dresser who will render to him the fruits of their seasons. So he's got them right here. It's kind of like when Nathan went to David and said, hey, here's the parable of this guy who killed another guy's lamb. And he says, hey, what should happen to this person? And David's like, oh, that man should die. He should be put to death. And Nathan's, you're the man. It's kind of that same thing here. They're sitting there saying, this man, who these vine dressers, who these wicked men, they should be destroyed. You are the vine dressers. Christ never says that explicitly. He continues on with it. Yeah, Bear.
Just a little bit later, chapter 23, Christ is correctly involved the Pharisees and said, you're hypocrites. You said that you're better than your forefathers, that you would have killed
Yeah, so it's almost like he lays aside this metaphorical language and he's like, listen, guys, I tried telling you. Now let me just lay it out for you. Here as it is. Woe to you, you hypocrites. Chris?
Well, you look back, we have the privilege at this point, they're at the end of their history and don't realize it. But we have the privilege to know that this is the close of Israel's history as biblically, spiritually, whatever you would see it. And I mean, I say that metaphorically, you're just weeks away, just a stone's throw. But you get to see this overarching theme that God keeps going back expecting something from Israel. He's going back because he's set the boundary. He's got a hedgerow. He's told them exactly where they're going to live, where to operate at. He's given them the vine. He's given them all the tools that they needed to be successful. There's nothing that God didn't give Israel that they lacked to be successful. He's provided to them a defense. He builds them a tower in this parable. He's given them everything that that they would need to be successful. I mean, I don't know how good of a vineyard you got to have a tower in it, but it must be a pretty good one where people are going to steal your grapes. And so this parable is showing how complete God has taken care of Israel. And the only thing he is expecting is something reasonable. He's not expecting Israel to produce lemons from a grapevine. He's expecting Israel to just bear fruit and for him to come back and receive his fruit. When he talks about the parable of the talents, he does the same thing. He's not saying every one of the successful ones, the 3 and the 2, 5 and the 2 talent guy, they both had the same percentage of yield, 100%. They both just doubled what they had. It's not that God is expecting us, Paul uses this terminology like, ascend to the moon. Moses actually quoted Moses, but it's not that God, that we say in modern vernacular, he's not asking us to hang the moon. He's expecting, it's a reasonable, Romans 12:2, reasonable service. It's the reasonable expectation that we should come to, and that's what he's saying with Israel. It's like all this stuff was set up so you could be successful, not for your benefit, but for mine. And you guys missed the whole purpose of the vine. It was never so you can have these fancy grapes or whatever that's growing on it. You can have your fancy fruit. It was never the purpose of it. It was for my purpose that he would ultimately complete in Christ. And so Israel, they turned inward, looked at themselves. And that's this paradigm that Jesus talks about always. The paradox of Christianity is that if you really want to gain your life, you've got to give it up. If you really want to be great, you've got to be the least and be a servant. And Israel could not get that through their head.
So yeah, it's like, whenever I was younger, I used to go back and read things like, I would hear stories in Bible class about Jesus feeding the 5,000, about healing the leper, about the blind man walks again, all of these different miracles that I would read about as a kid. And I'm thinking, wow, if I lived back then, my faith would just be top notch. I would be on point if I had just seen those things. And then as I got older, I realized I'm pretty sure the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the elders and the chief priests all thought the exact same thing because they had everything laid out for them. They had everything given to them on the entire plan of God. But when it came down to it, where did they end up? Killing the vine dresser's son. So what are some other purposes to us? There's going to be people who reject God, who reject Christ. Matthew 21:42a. Not A. I put that in my notes to remind myself to only read the first part. The stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. So I went back looking for this, but I couldn't find any empirical data. But I remember a lesson a long time ago that I had heard about whenever it talks about the cornerstone, there's either one of two different definitions of the cornerstone there. Either it is kind of like the main part of the slab of a house, kind of like in what we would think of today, or number two, it could also be talking about the topmost part of an archway, that being the cornerstone, the most important piece that you put in last. But either way, the stone cutters, they would go out to the quarry and they would already know the dimensions of everything that they would need to do. And those stone cutters would measure and cut precisely. Then their job was done. Now the cornerstone, regardless of whether it's the archway or whether it's the slab part of a house, it was different from the rest. And so whenever those stones got to the building site, you would have some sort of apprentice there who didn't realize, hey, there's this one stone that's different from all the rest. And they would end up throwing it out. So that's where we get this image of a rejected cornerstone, of a rejected piece here. Either way, it is the most important piece, the part that fits in, that upon which holds everything else together. And there's going to be the people that reject that significant of a piece.
That's kind of the way I remember it. And the cornerstone B is doing a lot of woodworking and stuff. Is if you want to get something square, you got to start with the square, right? And if you think about it, if you're all 1/28 of an inch in a 2-foot square, that 1/28, 100 feet down is going to be several inches, all right? So that's the purpose of having the cornerstone at a perfect 45. The key word there is perfect. The cornerstone is a perfect square to build all angles of the house.
Yeah, so my dad and I were cutting some shelves a couple days ago, and we made our first cuts. We did everything great, measured twice, cut once, and then about 3 shelves down, we realized this is not straight. We have no idea what's going on. And we finally realized our board was not straight to begin with, and we had to start all over. So yeah, that perfect beginning, that important piece. Either way, they rejected him. So number 3. This was the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. We've got to make him the most important part of our life. He goes through here, he gives this idea of the parable of the vine dressers just completely rejecting the prophets, rejecting his son that he sent. And now we get to the idea of us needing to make him the most important part in our lives. And to me, that's kind of why we're looking here at this parable. That's got to be our most important part. That's how it's going to help us follow Christ. If we put him first, that's what we're looking for here. I will say it until my dying day. The greatest piece of Chris Bates' wisdom that I can ever give to everyone else, and I have done this for years now. God first, family second, work third. If you do the first one right, all the rest of them fall into place. My dad has lived by that for years, and I have done my absolute best to do that for years. So now, as we're getting ready to begin to close, I want to open this up again to look here at how will this help me in following Christ? That's our entire theme this quarter, so let's discuss this one last time now that we know the ins and outs here. How will this help me in following Christ?
I think we need to remember what he said to the Pharisees, and put it in our heart. That we cannot reject him and still think that things will be all right. I think that's the only way to follow Jesus by obeying his command, accepting him as
think the parable here is pretty cut and dry with that. You know, what are we doing with our lives if we're rejecting Christ? Isaiah 5:1 talks all about what was happening with the Israel when they weren't being fruitful, when they weren't following God's plan. The vineyard itself was destroyed and made it to where no rain could fall on it again. That analogy there is pretty cut and dry. Yes, sir.
We need to be careful that we don't get caught up in our own wisdom or the lack thereof. Like not think smart. That's what was going on. A lot of what was going on here with the Pharisees, the leaders of the elders of the street. They had gotten so caught up in their own wisdom, in their own application and interpretation of the law that they had, the old law, that they felt they could do no wrong. And they had gotten to the point where they lorded it over to the common man. And they themselves felt they could die. And we have to be careful that we don't take on that same attitude ourselves. Because it's real easy to think, I've got this all figured out. I've got it all worked out. And I'll listen to so-and-so, I'll listen to so-and-so over there. And they tell me all I got to do is this, all I got to do is that. If I do that, I'm fine. But we have to be careful that we don't take the word of man. We don't take our own wisdom, but rather stay in the word and follow God's laws.
I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting there thinking, well, I've learned everything I can. Read through this a couple of times, studied it a lot. I think I'm good. And then as soon as like that, I'm humbled. I find something, I read something new. So yeah, if you didn't hear that, we made a really good point here about not getting caught up in our own wisdom, not getting caught up in what we believe to be the best, relying on God there. Yes, sir.
Jesus kind of summarizes in verse 43. It says, therefore I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a people producing its fruits. You can lose the kingdom if you're not producing fruit for God. That's a big part of this whole lesson. They were producing a lot of fruit, but it was for them, not for God.
So we're producing for God. That's our key here. Andrew. Okay, can you say that a little bit louder?
Are you going to be the one that's leasing the land, or are you going to be the one that's the messenger?
Okay. So you're going to be leasing the land, or are you going to be the messenger? Can you expound on that a bit?
One that's taking all this information and then doing nothing with it. We're going to be the one sharing the gospel like we should be.
Sharing the gospel like we should be. Okay. Good point. Yes, ma'am.
The priests and Pharisees, they realized that Jesus was talking about them, but they would not acknowledge that or repent. Instead, they were thinking about a way to arrest him, and that service is not something that we can be called back up to verse 43. It tells us that you're going to be crushed or you're going to be broken to pieces if you do not do.
They knew exactly who he was talking about. They perceived that he was speaking of them. I mean, I've caught students in lies before. I've asked redundant questions to students before because I already know the answer. And I've straight up told them before, I already know what the answer to this question is, but I'm going to ask you anyway to see if you're willing to lie to me. He knew exactly here what was going on. They knew what was going on, but they were just far too proud to admit it. They relied on their own understanding, on their own knowledge. We have anyone over here? So, as we close out here with this parable, we're relying on God. We're not relying on ourselves. We are being fruitful, and we are not rejecting Christ. That's our keys here. Mr. Jerry, would you mind closing us out in prayer, please?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for this time that we have together as like-minded Christians to open your word and understand these parables that you laid out for us, to ponder, to understand, and to take them into our thoughts and actions. Lord, we ask that you would be with those who are not with us tonight, whether by choice or by ailment. We ask that you would heal those. And we ask that you watch over us as